All right, I think we have quorum. So welcome everyone to today's session, organized by Vodafone Africa, of course. This is the fifth installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop. My name is Charles Kahiro and I am the Creative Director at TravelWorks Africa. And for today's session, as always, is led by Eric, and he is the International Science Coordinator at the GoFair International Support and Coordination Office. So for today, we will be checking in on the status of the FDP installations following the troubleshooting webinar, which happened prior to this one. So we are hoping everybody is more or less on the same page now and raring to go. As well as with regards to the metadata stuff, we will be covering a high-level config that we are going to delve into with regards to naming of the Vodafone FDPs. During the presentation, let us just keep our mics muted, as usual, to keep the background noises to a minimum so that they do not interfere with the flow of the presentation. So if you're here to do so, please do that now. As always, if you do have any questions, we would like to hear from you. And as such, just post them in the chat box. We will be checking and we will bring them up during the presentation or even at the end where we will have a question and answer session. So the chat box is your friend. If you do have any comments, questions, just put them in there. With that, I hand over to Eric. Eric, karibu.
Hey, thank you very much, Charles. And hello, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop. And as Charles mentioned, I would like to cover these two topics today. I think they reflect pretty much where we are in this overall process right now. So we had a troubleshooting webinar for the Fair Data Point installment or deployment just prior to this webinar here. So from 12 o'clock today, my time, until now. And I will report out on some of those results for you. And then the other topic I want to cover is something that we discussed last week, but I want to revisit it now because, in fact, we have revised the proposals that I had given last week. And I think we have a much more interesting proposal for configuring the fair data points going forward. Interestingly, it brings us into a very nice alignment with some developments here in the Netherlands as well. Okay, so to begin with, you may recall that we had the fair data point deployment teams. This was a Google Sheet, and let me see, I have the link here in the presentation here. I just took a screenshot, and what I'm showing here are presently how people who are associated with the Vodafone Africa project are distributed among what could be up to 12 fair data point teams. So we can imagine that we have the resources here to deploy actually 12 fair data points. And in the upper level here on row number 2 of the spreadsheet, we have the country lead, and below that we have a coordinator for the various fair data points. And then below that, we have what we call ownership, which is likely the institution that would be actually running the fair data point. And then we have also listed the technical support, of which there's really just 3 people. So there's Mariam, there's Putu, and there's Alia. And then, of course, the many other stakeholders here who are instrumental in actually procuring the data and the metadata for filling the fair data point. So I think we're succeeding pretty well on getting our teams aligned and getting the sense of where these fair data points are going to be running and under what kind of jurisdiction. And that will help us later. I'll come back to that later in this presentation when we talk about then configuring the FAIR data point per location. And let's see. But first, I want to cover the FAIR data point troubleshooting webinar we just had. And I was on this webinar along with Francesca, who was moderating, and we had the technical expert Luis Bonino and Case Berger to field questions for 2 hours on the FAIR data point installation and the blocks that were being encountered. And I'm showing just a screenshot here of the people who were participating on the troubleshooting. And I think we had up to 16 participants at the max. And presently, if you go to the call home service for the FAIR data point, you can see a number of FAIR data points that are currently running. And we've been able to identify a number of them as belonging to Africa. And in particular, there's the Uganda and Ethiopian FAIR data points that are pinging now, which is nice. And I'm showing 2 FAIR data points from Nigeria. And these are technically not part of the Vodon project, but these are, of course, coming from, these are, I guess, more or less experimental FAIR data points from Ravelworks, from where Charles and Ivy and Faye are helping us out. So in any case, we see some active FAIR data point response from Africa, which is quite nice. Here's the status following the webinar at the moment. Uganda, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Kenya are reporting sort of either deployed or in progress results. Zimbabwe and Tunisia are still composing teams and configuring the things necessary to get the FAIR data point going. In Uganda, at the Kampala International University, we have the FAIR data point at the production deployment, which is nice. And there will be a corrected domain name coming shortly, I guess. In Nigeria, they are still at the deployment stage, the local deployment stage, so not yet in production mode. At Mekele University, they are at production deployment, and they're listing as the URL here. And Kenya is indeed getting into the local deployment, but there are there will be work going on with 2 hospitals and 1 university clinic to be installed. So that was kind of an overview of where the different teams are right now. What we would like to do, and this is really, I think, a very good idea from Francesca, was that we really try hard to make sure that we get everybody up to the same level with the FAIR data point deployment before we proceed too much farther on specializing them per region or per hospital, just so that we can make sure we get everyone to this first checkpoint. So that's kind of the focus right now, and we'll be working on that going forward. So here's the an overview of just some of the blocks that we were encountering. This was a kind of a pattern that emerged over the last couple hours. It looks like there is some difficulty working with server certificates in relation to the FAIR data point. So I think we need to get clarification on how certificates can be better handled to enable the FAIR data point to get online. There were also maybe some lingering issues on the difference between the local machine versus the internet server. To get the FAIR data point to call home, it must be on an internet server and not just running locally. So there needs to be, I think, some, if there's uncertainty about what that means, we need to figure that one out. And then Yeah, so the other issue here that we saw was that in fact these domains must be registered before we can then configure to the fair data point to point to the machine. So this is three things that we noticed, and I think what's going to happen going forward, because we weren't able to resolve these issues in each case online today. I think what's going to happen going forward is that we're probably going to handle these on one-on-one interactions via the troubleshooting Slack channel that has been set up. And this is probably going to be primarily through the help of Case. But then it's, you know, at least we are starting to identify some of the, yeah, we're starting to identify some of the blocks here. So yeah, so that's I think good news. We can figure out what the problems are, and then it'll be much easier to engineer solutions for this, either one-on-one or as a group going forward. And in any case, these issues now are going to be very useful in when we write up the documentation following this work, so that we can really deploy this better. So I hear some background noise.
Just hold on, Eric.
Yeah.
I think there is someone who has their mic on.
Yes, I'm muting them now.
Yeah,
Mute
Shome
them.
Abegaz, I think.
Yeah.
Like I had said before, just put your mics off so we do not interrupt the flow of the presentation. Eric, back to you.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So yeah, just to reiterate again, having having seen some patterns now emerging in the blocks in the installation process, I think that's going to be something that we can address very directly then in the next generation documentation that's created, and it should make a lot easier for those to follow this work to be able to install their fair data points with a more expediency. So that's fine. We're doing pretty good there, I think. And then just kind of switching gears a little bit, I want to come back to this idea of, once the fair data points are in fact up and running, we're going to have to give them a name. And those who are choosing to run these fair data points will have to identify themselves as the owner and the responsible party for these things. And so we kind of went over this briefly last week. I want to kind of restate it again here and then go a little bit more into the detail in preparation for, when we get these fair data points up and running, we can very quickly sort of configure these and get to then the actual data verification parts. So what I'm showing here is the same icons that I've been using throughout the metadata for machine workshop, but in this case now I'm representing them in a little bit different way. So what I'm showing is in fact a vote on fair data point, but now rather than thinking about it from the point of view of an international level or a country level, this is really looking at it from the point of view of the hospital or the clinic, or let's say the data producer itself. And I think this is going to be a much more relevant and useful configuration for us. So what I'm showing is in the upper panel here with Hospital A, is that there's a fair data point running on behalf of Hospital A. So that means it's hosting metadata that points to these electronic case report forms running either on a server at the hospital or say on a server in arrangement with a university, for example. But wherever that server is, it has these electronic case report forms. And internally in the hospital, there will be some verification effort. So there will be some process we will put in that can interdict patient data, the appropriate patient data, and get it into this electronic case report form. I'm showing in the bottom panel another example, very much the same, but in this case, the fair data point is really at a university. So it might be, for example, Kampala International University. But in this case, the hospital or the clinic would be putting the data into this other trusted environment. In any case, we have these fair data points now. Well, let's say we have, in this case, 2 fair data points. Each one configured or named for the institution that's running the fair data point itself. So these fair data points, we think, are best configured for the hospital or for the clinical setting. And that would really allow the policy and the rules and the regulations, the governance for the metadata and the data to be under the jurisdiction of that organization that created the data, so the hospital or the clinic. And I think that's going to be not only more useful, but I think it's also going to be very much in line with what is now being proposed at the Leiden University Medical Center, where they are also trying to install the vote on fair data point. And I think they're also very much in favor of this idea that that fair data point is run by the Leiden University Medical Center, and this way we can identify fair data points based on these localities that actually collect the data. So then what we would hope to do with these first 6 or 12 fair data points is that they would be running throughout Africa, and they would be identifying the local clinics or hospitals that are collecting the case report forms. And coming now to a little bit closer into what this means for configuring the metadata itself in the fair data point, from a more technical point of view, then what we have is, you may recall, this hierarchical structure of the metadata. We have the fair data point at the top, and within that fair data point, there's one or many catalogs, and within any catalog, there's one or many data sets. And I think this is a proposition now that the fair data point itself will be owned by, or we'll say is published by, a particular hospital or clinic. Within the metadata, there's an opportunity to say that the fair data point conforms to some standard, and we will formulate that as a vote on standard. So to be very easy to identify then fair data points that conform to vote on, in addition to the hospital setting. And there's some other affiliations which I'll come back to in a minute as well. So let's say then a fair data point is run at a hospital. There could be many catalogs for all kinds of different data at that hospital, but we will launch with a catalog for electronic case report forms that are following this WHO standard. The publisher will be, again, the hospital. And within that catalog, there will be data sets of case report forms. And again, the publisher and the owner will be the same hospital. So that's, I think, a useful way of doing this. It really gives the ownership of all of this and kind of the jurisdiction and governance to the hospital itself. But there's also a need for other affiliations, such as, where is the hospital? What country is it operating in? Maybe there's an interest in identifying the state or the province or some regional location. There may be other organizations that would like to have affiliation with this as well. So indeed, if we consider just the membership in Vote on Africa and the participation of so many organizations, we may want to also list them as well. We can do that. And just to see how this is really gonna, what's being asked of us at the level of metadata, I'm gonna refer back again to this GitHub fair metadata or for fair data point specification document, which covers the structure of the metadata for the fair data point. And I'm looking here at what we call, the fair data point metadata layer. And this is all available now at the link that was on the other page. And a couple things. First is that a lot of the metadata records here that are being requested are following this RE3 data schema. So you could click on the RE3 data schema and find out more about what this schema is and where it comes from. But it's been borrowed here for the fair data point, because it's always good to be reusing resources when we can, rather than invent them ourselves. And the elements here that are shown in red are the ones that are required in order to launch the fair data point. And for those of you who have been working with the fair data point, you may have seen these mandatory fields already. But let's go back for a moment. When you look at this table, there's 5 columns here. In the left-hand column is the ontology or the vocabulary system that we're drawing from for these records. So at the fair data point level itself, we draw on RDF. That's the language, the markup language we're using here. There's something called DC terms, and this is a very broadly used metadata ontology. And you can see the DC terms we're borrowing here. It is a title for the fair data point, a version number for the fair data point. I'm indicating the publisher here in red, but it's also things like the language that we're operating in, the license conforms to the rights, references. Many of these are optional, but are useful. And we recommend, ultimately that we will try to complete as much of this as possible to create as rich metadata as possible. And of course, I mentioned before that publisher is going to be really key for us. This will give us basically the ownership or a name to reference this fair data point. And I think the trend right now in the discussion is that it's best if these fair data points are all using the hospital or clinic as the publisher. And there's other options here. So if we go to the R3D vocabulary, we can also link to the country in which the hospital is located in. And that will be a way for us to identify the country region for the fair data point. But then, yeah, we can also find ways of referencing the province or state regions as well, or say let's more localized regions or jurisdictions. So this is just an example, and at the web page itself, when you are there, you will see an example where this is completed for a fair data point that's running at the Leiden University Medical Center. And that gives you also then a real concrete example to see how this is working. And again, this is all following this RDF language, but at least I think these fields here are pretty straightforward in how they work. And if I go here, yeah, this is, I think, also another important metadata record for us, conforms to, and we will, as part of the Vote On project, we'll work hard to figure out a way to describe the standards that are being used at this FAIR data point, so that if there are FAIR data points launched out there that claim to be vote on FAIR data points, it'll be pretty easy to just go ahead and check to make sure that they're following the vote on standard. So that's going to be, I think, another important element in the metadata configuration as we go forward. But of course, we can dive down into the lower levels of the metadata. So at the catalog, at the data set, or the distribution. And again, you see something very similar. In fact, publisher is there, it's required. And this again will be, I think in most cases, the hospital or clinic that had collected the original data. And what I will be doing in the next week is communicating pretty closely with the attempts at the Leiden University Medical Center to set up a FAIR data point. And I'm going to see how they're going to structure their metadata and see if we can come to an alignment, or how far we can come to an alignment between the way we do it in Vote on Africa and the way we might do it in the medical center in Leiden. And I think that's enough for now. We can come back in another session and talk more about these metadata records and possible solutions for them. I think that's something we can start working out in the next couple of weeks. But I also want to remind us that once we get the FAIR data points up and calling home, and once we get them configured with this basic high-level metadata, we then will start, I think, the final phase of this, which is going back to the hospital or clinics and figuring out how it is we are going to get the patient medical data into these electronic case report forms. And so we will really then begin to turn our attention to this process here, which has already been initiated through the very nice questionnaires that were circulated earlier in this project. But we will come back and revisit that so that we can start initializing the data sets at the FAIR data point. And I'm going to leave it there for today, but I'm happy to take questions or hear comments as you like. And yeah, maybe Charles can help us with that.
All right. If you do have any questions or there's something that you would like clarified, please you can either type in your question in the chat box, or you can unmute your mic, just introduce yourself, your name, where you are situated, and ask your question. Today, guys are very quiet, eh?
Mm-hmm. I'm rolling back through some of the chat now. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I know there still might be some questions or clarifications with regards to the FDP installation. I think it's easier if we just consolidate all those questions in the Slack channel, because there also is where the tech support will be. You can do all the screenshots you need in terms of the code or the installation errors that you're getting, and they can be addressed on that side. So today we can focus either on team issues or the metadata structure that Eric has just gone over.
Thank you, Charles. Eric, thank you. If I may come in. Yes, yep. I think the main issue now is for us to get the FDPs running, because everyone seems to be, apart from Getu and Miriam, who already, and of course Nambobi, but at least for the main country FDPs, Getu for KIF for Mekele University and Miriam for the KIU. Everyone seems to be stuck at one point or the other, and I see it's difficult to think beyond that point. And so until we're able to get everyone to that same point of production deployment and solve the server problems, whatever configuration or whatever metadata specifications that are even done, it's still going to lead to more confusion. That's my own understanding. And we're continuing the discussion at Slack. I can see Professor Miriam from Tunisia here. She was trying to post her question earlier, but we needed to close to start this webinar. So I don't know if she's here, if she'll be willing to also share the difficulties she's facing at the Tunisian FDP deployment. Professor Miriam, I think I saw her here. But from the screenshots she shared, it still has to do with the same problem that almost everyone get to, and I think Dr. Sakinat had at the same time, which we're unable to completely finish. But if you could share that here, that could help, or maybe there could be someone who is able to offer something. But everyone seems to be stuck at that production deployment stage of the FDP, and that's why I'm really anxious that, excuse me, we'll just get that out of the way so that we can move forward.
Yeah, indeed, and that's why I didn't want to say too much more other than about the metadata configuration, except that I think it's a wise decision to say that the high-level configuration will be based in the hospital or clinical setting itself. I think that was a big decision reached in the last week, or let's say a proposal for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we do have a question in the chat box. Well, the question is it possible to develop for facilities their electronic case report forms for COVID-19 and for other non-COVID related patients? So I guess it's more, is it possible to develop case report forms for other non-COVID cases?
Yes, indeed. So, and that's a nice question. You can see my screen, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I have a catalog here for electronic CRF, and we could call it the electronic CRF for COVID-19. We could have just as well another catalog. Oops, let me do this over. We could have just as well another catalog for, let's say, I don't know, Ebola. So we could have electronic case report forms for any kind of viral or, let's say, infectious disease outbreak. And those would be different catalogs operating within the same FAIR data point. And, at the same hospital. And of course, each of those catalogs then would have their associated data sets. And so there's an opportunity here to just identify the data catalogs that are specific to different departments of the hospital or different clinical settings for the hospital. There could even be, you could even include research data and other non-clinical data if you would like. These are all possible in just by launching additional catalogs and data sets.
For the case report forms, do they need to be standardized across board for all, I guess we can call them topic areas? So the same way for COVID, it's one standard. So would the same have to apply for Ebola and every other disease, or can each hospital more or less develop their own?
Yeah, again, so there is complete freedom to operate here. That's the intention all along. So the people on the ground should really have the latitude to create the solutions that work best for them. And if that means additional case report forms that might look a little different than the COVID-19 case, that's fine. At the same time, we will encourage, the repurposing of, or let's say the reuse of existing standards and formats as much as possible. That's just a way to save time on development, number one, and that's a good idea. But it's also much easier than to guarantee interoperability later on. So there's always this tension between this freedom to operate and kind of, sticking close to some very minimal standard. And the FAIR data point is designed to try and help navigate that for the user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Checking the chat box for. Yeah, so I see there was an issue with the Docker installation. I think it was for Tunisia. Was it,
Yes,
Professor?
yes, that's Tunisia, yes.
Yeah.
They have shared the file here.
This was also, I think, a general trend that we saw on the webinar. There were some blocks just getting the Docker Compose going.
Well, I guess we'd need to know what the details are, because for most Docker deployments, right now they have packaged deployments where it comes with everything. So it's more or less Docker itself and Docker Compose together. And for most individuals, they will not be remitting any code back to GitHub, so they may not need any of the other installs themselves. But we may need to check, because I think once you have Docker more or less running, and it's just pulling the images after that, at least for the local. For the production, I know there are issues with the Let's Encrypt and the sandbox, and once you do the symbolic link, things are not working as expected. You may have your FDP is more or less deployed, but you cannot see it. So we would need to troubleshoot those ones. I guess in the Slack channel, because I don't think it would be as possible to do so here now.
No,
but I guess in the Slack channel we'll do more or less highlight how to download Docker and install it. Maybe it's going to assist a good number of individuals starting from that basic step, and then as we build on the others.
Yeah, and I think the hope or the intention as well is we have the technical leads who may be able to working together. They may be able to help the others who are encountering these problems as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric and Charles. We've had quite a number of problems with Docker download actually, and across different operating systems. People have had to kind of upgrade or reinstall or do so many other things. So what we will do, like you said, we'll take it to the troubleshooting channel. But in addition, I know Obina was helping people work out. I have to find out the operating system. Yes, Obina was helping out people with Windows, and Nambobi was working with people with Mac OS and Ubuntu. So in addition to the tech support, the TOT support, we also have some data stewards who have been able to like work on some of these problems. They just come in various forms across different operating systems, and they have to do a lot of things to figure out what exactly it is. So from the image she shared, I'm going to be like talking to Obina and Nambobi and looking at the error messages they might be able to figure out and help the team to then share in getting the FDP deployed, at least before, yes. So I'll
Another
also
way
be,
you can overcome some of these
yes,
challenges.
I'll also be updating Eric on the status. So after this webinar, we'll take it out of here to continue and then see how we can get them to at least download Docker and then deploy the FDP for that country.
Yeah. For those experiencing too many difficulties with setting it up on your own machine, you can look for a cloud solution. There are some that come with the environment already set up, so you get your Docker Compose on whatever environment you choose, whether it be Ubuntu or CentOS or any of the Linux-based systems. It would be a cloud server, so it would make it a lot easier for you to deploy your fair data point, essentially. For most local problems, an upgrade of your OS and any dependencies will usually help. But as Francisca is saying, we'll just move to the Slack channel, and it might be easier to discuss those issues there.
Indeed, and I think what we see happening here is, given the blocks that you have, I think it could be extremely valuable for those of you attempting the installation to keep a pretty detailed log of the blocks that you're encountering, because this may be something that could be really useful later on in the documentation phases, and trying to figure out how we can get this to be a more independent type process where people can better install the fair data point without the need for having to reach out to experts on Slack channels, for example. So for those of you who are doing the installation, if you're encountering problems, the more you can document those blocks, I think the better it will be going forward when we write the documentation.
Yeah. I believe the goal is to make it as a minimally painful process as possible. The more independent the installations can be, the better it will be for everyone. So everybody just log your errors and issues, and then it'll make it easier for the troubleshooting team. With that, I don't know if there are any questions linked to today's presentation. Going once, going twice. I guess that's it. Thank you, everyone. We really do appreciate that you took the time to be with us here. Just some final announcements before we sign off. The recorded version of this webinar will be available on the Vodafone Africa website. So if you did miss part of it, or would you like to review some section of it, by all means, be sure to check it out. Also join us next week for the 6th installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop, always on Tuesday, same time. But with regards to the signing up, details will be communicated on the various Vodafone Africa comms channels. For the deployments and any FDP issues, let's take them up in the Slack group or Slack channel. And then I guess that's it. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Great, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, it was a great session. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice Tuesday afternoon and nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.